The Arctic wasteland stretched endlessly before us, an ocean of white that seemed to swallow the horizon. The snow crunched beneath our boots with a sound that was too sharp, too loud in the vast silence of this frozen desert. Every step forward sent a jolt up my legs, numb from hours of trudging against the relentless storm. The wind screamed like a living thing, clawing at our suits, sneaking icy fingers through every seam it could find. It wasn't just cold. It was alive, howling with a voice that was half warning, half mourning, as though the land itself grieved our presence. We were three, Eliza quiet and steady, her hood pulled tight as she squinted against the blowing snow. Mark, burdened by his heavy pack of communication gear, muttering curses under his breath each time a gust knocked him off balance, and me trying to ignore the knot of unease in my stomach. Ahead, barely visible through the haze, a dark outline rose against the storm. At first, it was just a shadow, something easily mistaken for a ridge of ice. But as we drew closer, its unnatural angles became clear. The outpost, Station Polaris. It had been weeks since anyone had heard from the researchers stationed here. No transmissions, no reports, not a single word. We were told it was likely a technical failure. A broken antenna, a damaged relay. Something simple, something harmless. But out here, in this endless nothing, silence was never harmless. As we approached, I realized the worst part wasn't the isolation, or the storm, or the bitter cold pressing against our bones. It was the fact that the station looked as though it had been waiting for us. The storm lessened as we neared the outpost, its dark silhouette solidifying into sharp, angular structures. Station Polaris rose out of the snow like some frozen monument, untouched by the wilderness around it. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. The walls stood tall, unbroken. Solar panels, dulled by frost, still caught the weak glimmer of sun. Wind turbines creaked slowly, their blades groaning but still turning. It looked functional, alive even, which made the silence even worse. We exchanged wary glances as we reached the main hatch. Mark tapped his gloved fingers against the steel, then checked his tablet. He shook his head. Nothing. Systems aren't broadcasting. It's like they've been shut down on purpose. Eliza's eyes flicked nervously to the windows above us, but they were dark. Then where are they? She asked quietly, her voice nearly lost to the wind. I didn't have an answer. The hatch opened with a hiss of releasing air, and we stepped inside. The difference was immediate. The screaming wind vanished behind us, replaced by the steady hum of machinery. The station was warm. Lights glowed in the ceiling. Heaters whispered quietly, spreading gentle warmth through the metal halls. And everything was immaculate. The kitchen was stocked, shelves filled with neatly arranged supplies. A coffee mug sat on the table, its contents long frozen solid. Beds were perfectly made in the sleeping quarters, personal belongings folded and placed with care. Tools rested in their proper places in the workrooms. It was as if the crew had only just stepped out, intending to return within minutes. And yet, the weeks had passed in silence. The air felt wrong. Too still. Too heavy. It pressed against my chest, thick and stale, making every breath feel borrowed. We walked deeper into the station, boots thudding against spotless floors. Every door opened smoothly, every panel was polished, every corner disturbingly untouched. No signs of chaos, no sign of struggle, no sign of life. Then we reached the secure lab. The door was different. A thick slab of steel, scarred with deep scratches that clawed across its surface. And on the inside, smeared in dry, dark stains that could only be blood, were words that made my throat tighten. The sight of that message froze us where we stood. Don't open. The words were smeared unevenly across the steel, letters jagged and desperate, as if scrawled by someone with trembling hands. The stains had dried long ago, dark and cracked, but the violence of their creation still clung to the metal. Every letter carried weight, an echo of panic, of finality. Eliza's breath caught audibly through her mask. They wrote it from the inside, she whispered, her voice barely more than air. Mark stepped forward, pressing his gloved fingers to the scratches gouged into the door. "They tried to claw their way out," he muttered. His voice carried no disbelief, only dread. The steel was thick, reinforced, built to keep dangerous research secure. For the crew inside, it had become a tomb. We stood in silence, listening. For a moment, I thought I heard something, like faint knocking deep within the walls. But when I tilted my head, straining, it was gone. Only the hum of the heaters remained. The lock was still engaged from the inside. Whatever they had locked themselves away from, they had wanted it kept out at all costs. And yet, somehow they had all died behind this door. It took nearly an hour to force it open. Sparks rained as Mark cut into the locking mechanism, the hiss and crackle of the plasma torch filling the silent corridor. The smell of scorched steel mixed with something else, something older, heavier, seeping from within. When the last bolt gave way, the door groaned open. The stench hit us first, a suffocating sour mix of decay and stale air that clawed into our throats. I gagged, forcing down the bile rising in my stomach. Inside, the lab was dim. Emergency lights cast everything in a sickly orange glow. And slumped against the far walls, we saw them. 4 figures. The missing researchers. Their bodies were crumpled where they had fallen, skin pale and stretched, eyes frozen wide in expressions of pure terror. Their fingers were raw, shredded from clawing at the steel, leaving behind those desperate marks. Every surface bore scratches, gouges, evidence of frantic attempts to escape. Eliza covered her mouth with a shaking hand. Mark swore under his breath, stepping back as though distance could shield him from what we were seeing. They hadn't been killed violently. There were no wounds, no blood beyond the stains on the door. Instead, they looked starved, dehydrated, as if they had locked themselves in and chosen death rather than face whatever was on the other side. The air was thick, oppressive, carrying with it a silence that felt almost sentient. I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't just opened a door. We had disturbed something. Something that was still here. We sealed the lab door behind us, but it didn't matter. The images stayed burned into my mind. The twisted faces of the researchers, their hands shredded, their final words smeared in blood across the steel. What could drive trained scientists to lock themselves inside until thirst and hunger claimed them? The question followed us through the corridors as we began our sweep of the station. At first glance, everything seemed intact. The communication array wasn't damaged. It had been shut down manually. Systems were powered, but signals had been deliberately cut. The logs we accessed confirmed it. The crew had disabled their own transmissions. But why? Mark sat hunched over a terminal, scrolling through fragments of corrupted data, his face pale in the glow of the screen. "There's something strange here," he said quietly. "Look at this." He pulled up a chart, strange rhythmic pulses logged by the station sensors. At first, they looked like background noise, irregular waves of energy in the Arctic air. But when I listened to the playback, my skin prickled. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. The pulses rose and fell in a rhythm that almost felt like breathing. And worse, when the recording played, I thought I heard something underneath. A faint whisper, just out of reach, like words slipping through fog. Eliza leaned closer, her brows furrowed. "It sounds like voices." We listened again, straining to catch the shapes of syllables. But every time the pattern looped, it vanished into static. Nothing to hold on to, just the haunting sense that something had spoken to us and chosen not to be heard. The deeper we dug, the stranger it became. Logs showed systems activating without command, doors opening for no reason, lights flickering in unused halls, heating units cycling irregularly as though responding to something unseen. But the strangest part was the atmosphere itself. The air felt heavy, pressing down on us in every corridor. Breathing was harder than it should have been, as if the oxygen carried an unseen weight. Silence wasn't just silence here. It was thick, suffocating, alive. At times, when we stopped moving, I swore I could hear it. A low vibration, just at the edge of perception. Not loud enough to call sound, not physical enough to call sensation. Something between the two. And the station was too perfect. No dust, no decay, no hint of weeks without human presence. Everything maintained itself as though the building refused to admit it was abandoned. Eliza whispered what we were all thinking, but didn't want to say. It feels like it's waiting for us. And in that moment, with the hum of the heaters steady in my ears, I knew she was right. The first night inside Station Polaris was the longest of my life. We tried to act as though it was routine, unpack our gear, run diagnostics, log our observations, but unease clung to us like frost. No one wanted to sleep. The station was too quiet, too unnatural, as if silence itself pressed against the walls. It started with a knocking. At first, it was faint, so faint I thought it was the wind rattling the outer panels. A slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. It came from the corridor outside our quarters, echoing softly through the metal frame of the door. Mark froze mid-sentence, his eyes darting toward the sound. Eliza stiffened, clutching her notebook against her chest. We sat in silence, holding our breath. Then it stopped. When Mark finally opened the door, the corridor was empty. No sign of disturbance. No sound at all. But it didn't end there. Later, as we examined the sensor logs again, Eliza's face went pale. "Did you hear that?" she asked suddenly. "Hear what?" I replied. "The voice," she whispered. I replayed the log she was studying. Static hissed in the background, punctuated by the same rhythmic pulses. But beneath it, so faint it barely registered, I thought I heard my name. Whispered, drawn out, as if spoken from somewhere just behind me. I turned quickly, but the room was empty. That was the first time I felt it, the certainty that we were not alone in that station. The whispers grew bolder. Mark claimed he heard someone crying softly in the mess hall. When we rushed there, it was silent, untouched, a mug still frozen on the table. Eliza swore she heard footsteps pacing above us in the sealed attic. But when we climbed up, the dust lay undisturbed. The worst was when I was alone in the lab, reviewing the crew's research notes. At first, the hum of the heaters kept me company. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the sound shifted. The hum bent into syllables. Syllables formed into words. And the words carried my name. It wasn't just sound, it was inside my head, as though the very air was vibrating with meaning meant only for me. I staggered back, knocking over a chair, my heart pounding. And in that moment, I realized something horrifying. Each of us was hearing something different. Mark heard crying. Eliza heard footsteps. I heard my name whispered from the shadows. The station wasn't haunted by one voice. It was tailoring itself to us, feeding on us. And with each passing hour, the whispers grew clearer. It was Mark who found the hidden compartment. We had been combing through the lab, cataloging what little remained of the researchers' work. Most of the notes were scattered, fragmented, pages filled with equations that led nowhere, diagrams of waves and frequencies that made no sense. But behind a row of locked storage crates, Mark's gloved hand brushed against something that didn't fit. A panel flush with the wall, but not bolted like the others. "It's hollow," he muttered, rapping it with his knuckles. The dull thud confirmed it. With a crowbar, we pried the panel loose. A rush of stale, cold air seeped out, carrying with it a faint metallic tang. Behind the wall was a narrow compartment, lined with insulation and shielding, and nestled at its center, sitting as though it had been placed on display, was a crystalline object. It wasn't large, no bigger than a human skull, but its surface seemed to shift even in stillness, refracting the light in unnatural ways. Colors bent and warped across its facets, hues that didn't belong in the spectrum, shades the eye couldn't name but the mind recoiled from. Eliza inhaled sharply. My God. When I leaned closer, a vibration prickled in my bones. Not sound, not exactly, but something deeper. A hum that pressed against the edges of thought. And beneath it, like a whisper smothered in static, I felt the suggestion of words. It wanted to be heard. Mark reached toward it, but Eliza grabbed his wrist. "Don't," she snapped, her voice sharp with fear. "We don't know what it is, but we did know. In our bones, we knew. This was what they had found. This was why they locked themselves away." I forced myself to look back at the research logs. The fragmented notes suddenly made sense, references to resonance fields, pattern vibrations, localized hallucinations. The crew had been studying it, measuring it, documenting its effects. And then the notes had stopped. Abruptly, the last entry was a single line, scrawled in a shaky hand. "It's in our heads now." We sealed the compartment again, but it was pointless. The hum lingered in the air. My teeth ached with it. My skull felt too small for the pressure building inside. That night, I dreamed of the artifact, of standing in the snow, holding it in my bare hands, while a chorus of voices whispered from the storm. When I woke, I swore I still heard them. And I knew the artifact wasn't just in the station. It was inside us. The Arctic is a lonely place, even on the best of days, but inside Station Polaris, loneliness had transformed into something else, something far darker. By the time the second night fell, the silence between us was as heavy as the snow piling outside. None of us trusted each other anymore. None of us trusted ourselves. Mark sat hunched over the comms console, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He tapped at the controls obsessively, cycling through frequencies, listening to bursts of static as if they held some secret message only he could decipher. "It's not broken," he muttered to himself, though none of us had asked. "It's just blocked. Something's stopping it. Something doesn't want us calling out." Eliza paced the common room, her boots thudding against the steel floor in a restless rhythm. Her breath came out fast and shallow, fogging in the frigid air. "We should leave," she whispered over and over, like a mantra. "Pack supplies and walk south. Anything is better than staying here." But where would we walk? Hundreds of miles of white void stretched in every direction. Out there, death would come quickly, mercifully. In here, it was slower, gnawing at us bit by bit. I tried to keep myself focused on the data, but every number I read twisted into nonsense. Readings shifted on their own, flickering with impossible variations. Vibrations that pulsed in perfect rhythm. Pressure waves that came from nowhere. It was like the station itself was breathing. And then there were the sounds. It started with faint knocking at the edge of hearing. A tap 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 on the walls, so soft we couldn't be sure it wasn't the wind. Then came the voices, murmurs that grew louder the longer you listened. Sometimes they called my name. Sometimes they said words I couldn't understand, in a language that felt wrong in my ears. Mark swore the static from the radio was forming patterns, like speech hiding beneath the crackle. Eliza claimed she heard crying in the hallways, though when we searched, we found nothing. I told myself it was tricks of the mind. Cabin fever. Exhaustion. But deep down, I knew better. The artifact had opened a door inside us, and whatever was whispering had stepped through. At night, none of us dared to sleep deeply. We took turns keeping watch, though what we were watching for, we couldn't say. Every flicker of the lights, every groan of the steel walls, made us jump. We were three shadows haunting each other, each waiting for the other to break first. The silence of the Arctic outside should have been comforting, but it wasn't silence anymore, it was waiting. And in that waiting, I realized something chilling. We were already trapped. Not by locked doors or endless snow, but by our own minds. It began subtly, a faint hiss in the ventilation system. The kind of background noise you'd normally ignore after hours in a station like Polaris. But the hiss grew sharper, sharper still, until it seemed to shape itself into something more deliberate. Words. I froze at my workstation, straining to listen. The sound was thin, almost fragile, but it carried intent. My name, whispered like a secret. Reed. I spun around, expecting Eliza or Mark. But the room was empty, lit only by the sterile glow of the overhead lamps. My own reflection in the observation window stared back at me, pale and drawn, lips parted in disbelief. When I told the others, they didn't laugh. They didn't accuse me of imagining it. Instead, their faces told me what I already feared. They had heard things too. Eliza admitted she'd been woken in the night by a voice outside her door. "Don't open it," it had said, soft, insistent, close enough that she swore she felt the breath against her ear. Mark claimed the static on his console was speaking to him. He traced patterns on scraps of paper, fractals, spirals, strange sequences of numbers, and swore they were messages hidden in the noise. "It's communication," he said, eyes wild. "It's trying to talk to us." But if it was, the question wasn't how. It was why. The whispers grew bolder with each passing hour. They didn't just call our names anymore. They taunted. They pleaded. Sometimes they begged us to open the outer door. Other times they threatened us if we didn't. Worst of all, they began to sound like each other. I heard Mark's voice calling from the hallway when I knew he was asleep. Eliza heard me whispering from behind the lab door when I was in the comms room. And Mark swore Eliza was talking to him over the intercom, even though the system had been offline since the day we arrived. It was clever. Too clever. The artifact sat locked in its compartment, silent, inert. But we all knew it was the source. Even when we turned our backs on it, its presence pressed on our minds. Its shifting light seeped into the corners of our vision. It was patient, watching, waiting. The whispers wanted something, and they were willing to drive us mad to get it. That night, the station felt alive. Every wall pulsed with phantom sound. Every shadow quivered with unseen movement. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The voices weren't coming from the air. They were inside us now. It started with a sound no one could deny. A knock. Not the faint tapping we'd been half convincing ourselves was the wind or our own fraying nerves. This was deliberate, sharp, heavy. 3 knocks against the steel outer door, each one spaced with precise intervals. We froze where we stood. Eliza's face drained of color. Mark's hand hovered above his flashlight, as if a beam of light could possibly help. Again, knock, knock, knock. Eliza's voice cracked when she whispered, "It's out there." Mark shook his head, though his eyes betrayed him. "It's just the storm. Ice shifting. That's all." But his words were hollow. The storm howled, yes, but the storm didn't knock. The Arctic didn't ask for permission to come inside. I moved closer to the door's small, reinforced window, my breath fogging the glass. Beyond it, only swirling darkness. The wind carried sheets of snow, twisting like a living thing. Nothing else. No movement. No form. No footprints. Yet the knocking came again, louder this time, rattling the frame. We backed away in unison, our bodies moving on instinct. My pulse thundered in my ears. My rational mind screamed, "Don't open it," but some traitorous part of me wanted to. Needed to. The same part that had touched the artifact when I knew I shouldn't have. The noise shifted. From the door to the wall. Then the ceiling. Then the floor beneath our boots. It moved in circles, like something was prowling around the station, testing the boundaries, searching for a weak spot. Eliza gripped a fire extinguisher as though it were a weapon. Mark clutched his flashlight like a club. I found myself holding a wrench, knuckles white around the metal handle. None of it would matter if something broke through. But in that moment, we needed to believe we weren't helpless. "It's testing us," Eliza said, barely above a whisper. "It's a hunting." The sounds grew violent as the hours dragged on. Bangs that shook the walls. Scratches that screamed like nails across glass. rhythmic thumps that echoed through our chests. We checked the security cameras. Nothing. Not a single frame showed movement outside. No shadow, no figure, no animal. Just empty snow. But the noise was real. And worse, it seemed to respond. When Mark cursed at it, the banging grew louder, sharper, almost mocking. When Eliza cried, the scratching became frantic, as though savoring her fear. By dawn, if you could call it that, in the endless Arctic night, the sound ceased. Silence returned, pressing down on us heavier than ever. But that silence wasn't mercy. It was patience. Whatever was outside or inside had tested us. And now, I feared, it was waiting for the next move. By the third day, we were unraveling. Sleep came in fragments, shallow and haunted. Every creak of the station jolted us awake. Every whisper in our minds sharpened into screams. Our bodies were alive, but our sanity was slipping thread by thread. Eliza sat slumped at the common room table, her face as pale as the snow outside. Her eyes were bloodshot, her lips cracked. She muttered under her breath, words that made no sense, phrases that looped endlessly like broken recordings. Mark wasn't any better. He paced the floor like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair until it stood in wild tufts. He muttered about the comms, about the artifact, about signals we couldn't hear. It's talking to us, he insisted, his voice cracking. It's giving instructions, we're just too stupid to listen. I tried to keep order, to be the calm one, but I felt it too. The weight, the drain, the constant pull of something unseen gnawing at the edges of thought. Even my reflection in the frosted windows looked alien now. Eyes hollow, jaw tight, a stranger trapped in my skin. The noises returned with a vengeance that night. Scratching, banging, a low groan that vibrated through the steel, deep and guttural, like some massive thing pressed its mouth against the walls. The sound wormed into my chest, rattling my bones. Eliza broke first. She collapsed to the floor, clutching her ears and sobbing. "It's in my head," she screamed, her voice raw. "It won't stop. It won't stop." Mark snapped. He grabbed his flashlight and bolted down the corridor toward the far door. "We can't just sit here and let it play with us," he shouted. "I'll kill it, whatever it is, I'll kill it." "Mark, don't." I chased after him, but he was fast, adrenaline driving his steps. His beam of light cut jagged paths across the walls, shaking in his trembling hand. He reached the door and froze. The banging had stopped, just like that. Silence pressed against us like a hell breath. Mark placed his hand on the handle. "It's quiet now," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Maybe it's gone." "No." Eliza's scream cracked the air as she stumbled toward us, her extinguisher still clutched like a lifeline. "That's what it wants." "Don't open it, Mark. Don't open it." The silence lingered, heavy and perfect. Then, as if mocking us, the door shuddered under a violent slam. Once, twice, the third time, the sound thundered through the station, shaking every bolt and rivet. Mark staggered back, his courage gone in an instant. We retreated together to the common room, clutching our makeshift weapons, staring at the door as if it might explode inward at any second. It didn't. But the damage was done. We weren't just afraid of what was outside anymore. We were afraid of each other. And in that moment, I knew the truth. If whatever haunted the station didn't kill us, we'd do the job ourselves. The station felt smaller with each passing hour. The corridors, once wide enough to move freely, now pressed in like the narrowing walls of a trap. Every flicker of the fluorescent lights, every groan of the steel frame under the weight of ice, set our nerves on edge. We couldn't escape the feeling that the station itself was shrinking, squeezing us closer and closer together until we break. And break we did. Eliza barely spoke to Mark anymore. She avoided his eyes, avoided his footsteps. I caught her watching him, lips pressed tight, fingers tapping against her thigh in a rhythm that betrayed her fear. She thought he was dangerous. Mark thought the same of her. He whispered to me when he thought she wasn't listening, his breath hot against my ear. She's listening to it. Don't you see? It's inside her. She's not Eliza anymore. I wanted to dismiss it, but then I saw the way Eliza muttered to herself when she thought no one was paying attention. Sometimes I even caught words, broken fragments of phrases that didn't belong to her. Open it. Open the door. At first, I thought it was just stress, sleep deprivation. But then one night, I woke to find her standing in the corridor, staring at the sealed compartment where the artifact lay hidden. She wasn't moving, wasn't blinking, just staring. When I called her name, she turned her head too slowly, as if her mind had been far away. Her eyes were wide, glassy, reflecting the pale glow of the overhead lights. She didn't answer me. She just walked back to her room and shut the door. Mark's paranoia deepened after that. He began carrying a wrench everywhere, gripping it so tightly his knuckles split. He barely ate. He barely slept. He watched Eliza constantly, waiting for her to slip. And me? I was no better. I started doubting both of them, wondering if the artifact had already taken them, if I was the last one left who was still me. But then I'd catch myself, hear the whispers calling my name, feel the tug of something inside my own skull, and I'd wonder if I was already gone too. We no longer trusted each other. We no longer trusted ourselves. The station wasn't just haunted anymore. It had become a mirror, reflecting back our deepest fears, amplifying them until they tore us apart. One night, as the three of us sat in silence in the common room, I realized something terrifying. We weren't allies anymore. We were threats, and the whispers knew it.